Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's video. Today's video is all about how to water test your equipment and initially set that up for the first time. I'm going to be running through today's process with the reflex housing and also the edge housing. Now the process is similar, all the fundamentals are the same. We want to make sure that you're happy with the setup on how to seal this, how to attach your lens port, and how to run through those initial water tests to be happy with your equipment. So straight out of the box, what you need to do is you need to remove the backplate from your housing, and you need to make sure that you have this rear O-ring in place. And also there's an O-ring on the front of the housing also. Now that goes the same for the reflex. There's one on the rear and the front. It's always good to visually check those and make sure that they're in place and there's nothing coming over and stopping the seal from happening. Now with your backplate, simply align that on, line that up, engage the clips, hearing that clicking sound and going back and double checking and making sure these are actually locked down, ready to go. With the lens port, your port has a thread on the rear of it. You have the element on the front and the port thread on the rear. To assemble the port, it's as simple as aligning that on, and that should screw on nice and smoothly. Once it stops, just crank it down a little bit harder, as hard as you can, and then that's nice and tight. Now the process for the reflex is very similar. The only difference really is that the back plate is not fully removable. It's on a hinge system. The same thing, you want to check this O-ring, make sure that that's nice and clean, there's nothing sticking out over it that's going to stop the seal. Clips go on, check that they're nice and tight and in place. Check that the front O-ring is again clean, seated properly, there's nothing in the way. Grab your lens port, align the thread, screw that on. Once it stops, nice and tight. So you can see the process is very similar between the two. Once you've done this initially out of the box, you're ready to perform the water test. For the initial water test today, we're going to be doing it by the pool, but if you're not by the pool, that's fine also. You can fill a large bucket of water at home, or your bathtub, or even just your sink in the kitchen will do for this initial test. Before you dunk it in the water, what you want to do is just visually go around and check things, make sure that those clips are down, make sure there's nothing in the O-ring. Again, just make sure your port's tightened down, test your clips, and we'll put it in. We want to hold it down at an arm's depth, if possible, for 10 seconds. So we just push it in like this and count to 10. We bring that out and we give it a quick visual inspection. What we're looking for here is any water on the inside of the housing, on the inside of the lens port, and we're good to go. And we're going to repeat that test again. Now when you push it down, if you see any bubbles, it may be coming from air trapped in the side handle here in this contours. So don't be alarmed there. We're going to do that test one more time. We suggest repeating that process at least 3 times or even more until you feel comfortable with that. And visually check it, make sure everything's dry. If everything's dry and no water's got in the housing, you're good to go, and we'll move on to that next step. Before we move on to the next stage of installing your camera into the housing, we need to dry the gear off. We suggest a nice soft cloth or towel, taking note of that front port, not to make sure this doesn't have any sand or grit on there, which is going to scratch it. Give it a bit of a shake to remove some of this water that may be trapped inside these side handles, and just get some of that bulk of the water off the housing. When you're removing the lens port, you need to also make sure that you do that on an angle facing downward. Now what that's going to stop you doing is any water, if I did it this way, possibly running back in on top of your camera and your lens. So I always suggest to remove the lens port on an angle facing downwards like that, to stop any foreign matter coming back into the housing. Now that you've dried off your equipment and those initial water tests that you've performed have passed and you're happy with the whole setup process, it's time to learn how to install your camera into the housing so you can get out there and be ready to shoot. What I like to do first is attach my lens port, as you were shown earlier, making sure that's nice and firm. And I like to keep the lens port cap on or some protective cover to make sure that I don't damage that front element. At a minimum, you should have something nice and soft down when you do this. Now I like to stand my housing up like this, so I've got easy access into things. So we release the clips. We need to attach the camera plate. Now the camera plates are dedicated to your camera model, and they just live in the bottom of the water housing like this. They attach to the bottom of your camera via the tripod mount. Now the tripod mount is standard on every camera, but you do need to make sure that you have the right plate for your camera. So simply align that up where it's got to go. You need to secure that into place with a flat edge screwdriver like this. So it's good to have one of these in your kit. Make that nice and tight. Now that that's secure, when I install this into the water housing, it's going to make sure that all those backplate controls that you see here hit exactly where they need to hit, and the camera and the lens aren't going to move around when you're out there in the water. Next step is to connect the cable release jack on here. Now what that's going to allow you to do is to use those shutter buttons on the top and the bottom of the housing. It goes the same for both models. And that's going to allow you to focus, fire, and also to be used things like the M3 pistol grip as well. Now your cable release may be in a different position, and it may also look different, but essentially they all do exactly the same thing. So once you locate it, you simply connect that, and that's going to create the circuit which goes into these electronic shutters. Now a good way to test that, to make sure you've set everything up, make sure your camera's on, and just test the shutter, and that's firing, I can hear that, so I'm good to go. Now when I install this into the housing here, you can see there's a mount where this plate was. You simply align that up. Now it's a good idea just to retract the zoom gear. Even if you're not using a zoom, that's going to give you a little bit more room just to push that into place. Now if you are using a zoom gear, you do need to make sure that that is fully retracted to let that pass into the housing and then engage it into place. There's no locking mechanism, but you do need to make sure that the camera is firmly in the whole way. Grab the cable release and just put that down the side, out of the way of the O-ring path. Backplate is on. Align everything up. Clips are back on. And you want to hear that satisfying click. Make sure that everything is nice and secure. Visually just have a look and make sure that everything's nice and secure in there and there's nothing over the O-ring. Check your clips, they're nice and secure. Lens port's firmly down. And there you go, you're ready to shoot. The process for this is exactly the same for the reflex with the camera plate attaching to your camera, but also for the lens port as well. Same thing, you want to just make sure that everything's in and secure. You've attached the cable release and you want to go back and check your clips before you get in the water. Make sure your port's nice and firm and you're ready to shoot. We hope that video explained a bit more about the process and gave you a bit more insight on how to initially set up the equipment, water test, attach your camera and your lens port to the housing and get in the water shooting. It is a lot to take on at the start, so we really hope that this video explains some more detail about that. As always, if you have any questions or you have any concerns or things that happen down the line that you want to reach out about, our staff are always online. You can contact us through all the details on the website. And if you like videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and check us out on socials. We're always sharing new videos, tips, techniques, and some of those behind the scenes on great shoots from our team around the world.